Good morning. It's Grant Gillard, pastor at the New Horizon Presbyterian Church outside of lovely Odessa, Missouri. Giving a little sermon today because I'm not going to be in church on Sunday. This is kind of like the Macy's Day Parade. I am pre-recording it, although there will not be edited snippets of previous sermons or whatever went on in that one block parade. But we do have church today. We are doing what we call drive-in church. That is, people come in, you stay in your cars, you stay in that protected little bubble, and we transmit our worship services from inside the building with an FM receiver, and you can pick it up on your car radio, and you can adjust the heat. You can set the seat back, listen with your eyes closed, which I've had some parishioners tell me they can hear me better if they close their eyes while sitting in the pews. Okay, if that works for you, that's good. But you can put your seat back, you can relax, you can listen to the sermon and the music, and we still will have this worship service. Well, today is the first Sunday of Advent, and we're turning a corner in the church calendar. We've had what we call Christ the King Sunday. It's the last Sunday of our liturgical year, which does not correspond with our calendar year. So we've finished the church liturgical year. We've had Thanksgiving, and now we turn the corner into this thing we call Advent, which I always thought growing up was the getting ready for Christmas and getting preparation for that. So that's kind of what Advent is, but more it's not just that. It's really being watchful and looking for the ways that God breaks into our lives and Jesus Christ touches our lives and changes us for the better. And really, it doesn't have to happen just now, but it's one of those things that Advent prepares us to appreciate the celebration of Christ's birth. The passage for today comes out of Mark 13, verses 24 to 37, and I'm reading for what we call the New International Version. Jesus has been teaching, and he's been saying some really cryptic, crazy stuff. I think a lot of us, as we read that, go, what are you talking about? Well, here's how verse 24 begins. Jesus says, "But in those days following that distress," and now he's going to quote from the prophet Isaiah. He says, "The sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the sky, and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. At that time, people will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory, and he will send his angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of the heavens. Now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know summer is near. Even so, when you see these things happening, you know that it is near, right at the door. Truly I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away till all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. But about that day or hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. Be on guard. Be alert. You do not know when that time will come. It's like a man going away. He leaves his house and puts his servants in charge, each with their assigned task, and tells the one at the door to keep watch. Therefore, you keep watch, because you do not know when the owner of the house will come back, whether in the evening or at midnight or when the rooster crows or at dawn. If he comes suddenly, do not let him find you sleeping. What I say to you, I say to everyone, watch." Well, if Advent is a preparation for Christmas, for us to get ready to celebrate Christmas, that's not a really good, warm, fuzzy feeling. And when I send out Christmas cards, that is not the message I think I would put on the Christmas cards I would send out. We don't send out very many Christmas cards anymore. I can remember as a child, my mother would send out hundreds of cards to all her old college friends and relatives, and even relatives we just saw the last weekend, they still got a Christmas card. Each person my mother sent a Christmas card to, she had a little 3x5 index card and a little box that she kept in her desk drawer. On it was the name and the address. Of course, back in those days, we hand wrote addresses on envelopes. And then she had the year and an S-R, send and receive. If you didn't send us Christmas cards, well, you got off our list. Or if we had sent them to you and we didn't hear anything coming back, you got like 3 years and you were knocked off, 3 strikes and you were out. Well, this first Sunday of Advent, I'm reminded that the church celebrates really 3 Advents. The first Advent is the historical event in a manger in a small town called Bethlehem, the city of David. It was preceded by many Old Testament prophecies predicting that this is the birth of the Savior. This is the Messiah. This is the Christ. And this is how you will know him. And all kinds of, if you want to call it predictions or prophecies from the Old Testament, were setting people up to be watchful for the birth of this new Messiah. That's the first Advent. Now, the second Advent, I think of as when we come to that realization that we need a Savior in our lives. The second Advent is this rebirth of the Spirit. When Nicodemus encountered Jesus, Jesus says, you must be born again, or born from above, or renewed in your spirit. And this is preceded by the realization that we often make a mess of our lives. We're incapable of managing our situations, our emotions, and our intellect. We need a Savior, just plain and simple. And when we come to that realization of just how much of a mess that we have made, that we are incapable of making the right changes in our lives, well, this is when we kind of have that rebirthing experience. And of course, some people say you got to hit rock bottom before you can start climbing up. And I've heard a lot of really inspirational stories. We call them gutter to glory, where people really have found themselves at their wits' end, totally incapable of managing lives and their relationships, and they found this renewal in Jesus Christ who got them straightened out. So that's the second Advent, this renewal, this Christ coming back into our lives. And I don't think that's a one-time event. I think that happens quite more frequently than we think. And of course, in my own personal life, it just seems like every time I go to church, there's a little sense of renewal, a little sense of recommitment. And you know, I look at the week that was and the 2 weeks before that, and man, I tell you, sometimes I mess up. I just don't know what to do. And that's going to church for me and listening to some of the hymns and listening to the prayers. This rebirth, this little momentary incremental inspiration that keeps me going. So that's the second rebirth, the second Advent. The third Advent that we talk about in the church is what we call the second coming. Now, when Jesus left the disciples on Ascension Day, he said, I'll be back. Arnold Schwarzenegger didn't. That really wasn't original with him. But Jesus said, I'll be back. I will come back when I return. And when he left, 2 angels were standing around talking to the men. This is from the first chapter of Acts. And told the disciples, you saw Jesus leave. He will come back in the same way. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means sometime, somewhere, Jesus is going to come back. And when he comes back, he will put everything like in a cosmic reset. There will be a lot of redemption, restoration, and it will be preceded, Jesus says, in various places, by a lot of signs. And these signs will tell you the end is near. It's time for the third Advent, the end, but a new beginning. Well, people have looked at that, and they tend to either be prescriptive or descriptive in their interpretations of what's happening around our world. When it's prescriptive, it's like we're looking for a one-to-one correspondence between what Jesus says or what the scriptures say and what we see in life. And it's got to be a pretty good fit. a prescriptive one-to-one correspondence, which is really hard because sometimes we don't know what the scriptures are really talking about, but we try to align contemporary events with what we think the scriptures are telling us to look out for. And it can be kind of tricky. Supposedly, in this world that has the signs of trauma and distress, we are to look for somebody bearing the number 666. Well, even that's up for debatable interpretation. Sometimes we depend how you look at and interpret that old antique language that has no real contemporary correlation. The number could be 616. So there's a lot of things that are debatable, and scholars have debated for centuries. But 666. And there was a time when a certain president, whose first name had 6 letters, his middle name had 6 letters, his last name had 6 letters. Wow, 666. This was Ronald Wilson Reagan. Supposedly he was the Antichrist. Well, that's all come and gone, and that prescriptive challenge is hard. So sometimes we shift that to say, let's just call it descriptive, that there are events, contemporary events, that describe trauma and the upheaval. And if you remember that scene from the original Ghostbusters, and the Ghostbusters have been arrested, they're in the office of the mayor. They're trying to convince him that there's this huge wrath of God type stuff going down in the city, and the mayor needs to act. Well, he's not so sure, and one of the Ghostbusters busts in and says, "This is real. This is like the wrath of God stuff." And Bill Murray, he kind of carries it to an extreme when they talk about tornadoes and earthquakes and fires, and Bill Murray says, "And it'll be human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together, total insanity." Well, that's kind of what we look for in these signs that describe what we would think of as the end of time, which is the new rebirth with the third advent. So what are we looking for? What might we see? Well, we might see unquenchable fires covering millions of acres. We might see hurricanes, one after another, so many that we run out of names for them. We might see a pandemic. We might also see promises of a vaccine that might have side effects that are actually worse than the disease it promises to cure. We might see crooked politicians who say, "Here are the rules for the lockdown, and oh, by the way, these rules don't apply to me, but all you people, you stay home on Thanksgiving while I fly to visit my family and celebrate Thanksgiving." So these are some of the signs. And of course, we may see riots and looting. Right now we're looking at murder rates in our big cities like Atlanta and Chicago and New York. Unprecedented levels, setting new records of murders. Well, we'll probably also see the division of families over politics. And, I think a horrible sign right now is Disney, the Walt Disney Company, is laying off 32,000 people from their theme parks. Of course, the pandemic has created this lockdown, and I didn't just come up with this list. These are actually things people are looking at in our contemporary culture and are saying these things they're all aligning to something very bad that's coming. Now, did Jesus say, "Hey, pay attention and start predicting when the end times are coming and the third advent takes place"? No, he didn't say that. He didn't suggest that we obsess over trying to figure all this stuff out. He just said, be watchful, be awake, live expectantly, be ready. Don't be fooled by false prophets or wordy politicians. Have faith and don't be surprised what's happening around you. Stand firm. Don't lose heart, and persevere. And along those lines, I think of a parable he taught. It's recorded in Luke 18. The 18th chapter of Luke starts out with a very simple line. It says, "Then Jesus told his disciples a parable to show them that they should always pray and not give up, that we should not lose heart." It tells a story about an unjust judge and a widow who's trying to find justice for herself. That little story ends when Jesus says, "However, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth?" So this really squirrely first Sunday of Advent passage, Jesus talking about some calamities that are probably going to be very upsetting and very confusing. And he says, these are the signs. Now, descriptively, we're not sure what these signs may look like, but there'll be a lot of confusion. There'll be a lot of distress. And Jesus says the best thing you can do is just watch. Be ready, because we don't know when it's going to happen. So this is the way Advent starts out: to be watchful, to be ready, to be waiting, to live expectantly. And really, when the people encountered the first Advent with Jesus' birth, a lot of the prophecies in the Old Testament said, here's the signs. Be watchful. Be ready. And of course, when it came in this little town of Bethlehem, a lot of people said, well, why not in a big king's castle or in some prominent politician's house? Nah, that's not the way Jesus comes into our lives. And isn't it odd when we celebrate Christmas Eve, the first people who got the news that the Messiah was born, that the Christ child was now present, were the shepherds. And the shepherds were really not wildly popular people. These weren't the kind of jobs you would aspire your children to grow up and do. They were kind of rough around the edge. They were kind of different people, and it just seems very odd that the news of Christ's birth would come to those who are, today we would call marginalized or othered, that is set aside from the contemporary culture of popular people and celebrities, influencers. So the message today is just be watchful. Don't obsess with the details of what we're looking at and is this the end time? Because very ironically, every generation has had some major events in their time span that have completely, it altered the way they looked at life, and they thought, this is the end. Every generation has had these circumstances and these things that have forced people to really grasp what's happening, and they thought the end times were here. Well, if every generation has had them, we may be in the same boat, trying to guess, trying to speculate. Jesus says, don't worry about it. Just be watchful. Just be ready. Just keep the faith. Until that time, that's what we do. And so in that time, we do good works. We love one another, as Jesus said. We continue to be his witnesses and his ambassadors in a world that sorely needs reconciliation. Until we meet again, God bless. And again, if you want to join us for worship, we worship at 10:30. And you can come as a drive-in, drive-up, perfectly isolated, protected. And even though we miss that face-to-face connection, we're working on that. When things get better, we'll be transitioning into what we call live person or very socially distanced seating so we can worship together. Until that time, God bless.